Meeting to order, and I acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. And notice to attendees joining via Zoom to please sign up for public comment using the question and answer function. Please, if you do so, please include your name, address, and the agenda item you wish to speak to. Through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I'll move that pursuant to section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016 is amended. The March 28, 2023 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall 380 3rd Street in Tofino, BC. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Also through unanimous consent, I'll move that the March 28th, 2023 regular council agenda be adopted. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. We have a consent agenda. If there are no objections, through unanimous consent, I'll move that items 4.1 to 4.4 of the consent agenda on the regular council meeting held March 28th, 2023 be approved and received. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Mr. Shortall, do we have anybody signed up for public comment on agenda items?
Thanks, Mayor. Currently, there's nobody signed up for questions. I will do a call to public now. If anybody from the public attending either in person or via Zoom would like to make a comment, you can do so now by using the question and answer function on Zoom, leaving your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. Calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times, and there are no comments.
Super. I'll move on to the mayor's report. Noting we have a long agenda, my mayor's report will be brief. I would like to point out that we have a new communications coordinator here, Keegan McCool.
Hello.
Hey, that's so exciting. You got to clap. For me, anyway. Great to have you here. We also have, it was nice to be this past week at the Chamber of Commerce awards ceremony. It was lovely to see so many businesses doing such great work, and love to see all the businesses and managers and owners who won awards. Also, it was a pleasure to be at the Tourism Tofino AGM this morning. It was excellent to see that. That's it for my mayor's report. Moving on to correspondence. We have a letter from the Honourable Kang, Minister of Municipal Affairs, regarding the Growing Communities Fund grant. I do have something brief to say about this, but any councillor would like to say something about this letter?
There's going to be lots of opportunity to talk about this one, yeah.
There's probably going to be lots of opportunity to talk about it, but the first thing I think I would love to say is just to extend my thanks to the province, Minister Kang, for this unprecedented sharing to small, well, every community and municipality actually, but especially for those struggling with strong growth and all of the needs that and pressures that come along with such growth. So I really do appreciate that. I look forward to discussing with staff and council how to use that fund. Wonderful. We also have a correspondence from Island Coastal Economic Trust. And this is actually a letter requesting support for a letter to the Premier Eby. And as many of you know, the Island Coastal Economic Trust is growing low on funds, and unless there's a renewed investment from the province, that trust will have to close. So this is a fairly late addenda to the agenda. But I would like to ask council if this letter garners your support. Yes. Okay. My name's on it, but I want, as your representative, I think I would like to hear your support. That's great. That should go out to Premier Eby, and I trust that a new investment into the Island Coastal Economic Trust will happen, and we'll continue to see the benefits throughout the island. and beyond. Presentations and reports. We have a special event permit.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Oh, did I miss something?
The staff will require a resolution to respond or to regarding that piece of correspondence, just to authorize the mayor to sign.
Oh, you want an actual authorization for the mayor? Okay, well, then I'll do that. From the chair, I'll move that the mayor be authorized to sign the Island Coastal Economic Trust letter of support to Premier Eby. Second by Councillor Steer. Any further comments? All in favor? Perfect, thanks. Perfect. That letter is actually going out right now, so I'll probably stop in a bit and text the guy to say it's okay, my name's on it. Presentation reports, can we move right on to presentations reports? Ms. Hutchinson. Actually, there is no presentation report for this one. This is just a special event permit. You're here. And just for new councillors, because we have a municipal alcohol policy, that these are to come before council and to be reviewed by council. So that's why we're seeing it here. But you know, the more of these we see and we see them successfully run, then I'm sure this is something we can talk about removing from presentation report. Any comments on this? Would somebody like to read the motion?
I move that staff be authorised to issue a special event permit conditional of the following requirements being met for use of the Tofino Community Hall to the organiser of the current swell event scheduled to be held May 21, 2023 at 6 p.m. 1. Provision of an approved Tofino Community Hall facility rental agreement. 2. Provision of a certificate of insurance naming the District of Tofino as additional insured. 3. Provision of an approved Vancouver Island Health temporary food service permit. 4. Provision of an event safety plan. 5. Provision of a completed municipal alcohol policy events compliance checklist. And finally, 6. Provision of an approved special event permit for the sale of alcohol from the BC Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Thomas. Any comment? All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you. On to 10.2, we have a zoning amendment, 320 Tonquin Park, and this is permission to proceed. I believe we have a report. Mr. Thick.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I do have a brief presentation to go along with the report that was part of Council's. So as was noted, this is a zoning amendment application for the property at 320 Tonquin Park Road. We're considering permission to proceed this afternoon. Brief background, the application was received on August 24th of last year. Again, this is a permission to proceed report. So generally it's a quite high level introduction to the project to see if council is supporting it at this point, and an opportunity for council to decide whether a public hearing is appropriate for this particular application. The subject property is accessed off Tonquin Park Road, but it stretches down towards the actual Tonquin Park itself. It's a little bit of a strange kind of shape of property. That's the result of a subdivision that was completed, I believe, about a year and a half ago now. The applicants actually anticipated further subdivision of the property, and that's why the subdivision was created to create the lot as we now see it. This rezoning that we're considering would be the next step in their kind of long-term vision for further subdivision. The proposal is to rezone, as noted, to facilitate a 4-lot residential subdivision. There's a significant remainder of the parent parcel that would be donated and added to Tonquin Park. So I'm just going to go back one slide. Actually, I'm not sure if the laser pointer on this one. No. So if we look at the, I guess the lower part of that of the picture there, the image there, kind of the lower rectangle. If you're going to continue the horizontal blue line directly across that sort of lower section is the proposed area that would be given to be donated towards Tonquin Park and included as part of Tonquin Park. That's the sort of community amenity contribution that the applicant is offering in this case. Most of the existing permissions would be retained. So this would be a house and a cottage or suite, accessory buildings and home occupations on each of the new parcels. Short-term rental permissions would also be removed. So there's kind of two significant bonuses to the district in this particular application. One is the donation of a significant chunk of the property to the Tonkin Park to be retained as park, and the other is the removal of short-term rental permissions on the subject property. Taking a quick look at some of the policy views to evaluate these applications, the vision to action plan is largely supportive, and staff feel that there's a reasonable balance between increasing density and development in that area, as well as environmental considerations. That's something that comes up throughout all of our documents, but is especially noted in our vision to action plan. There's not a major increase in density, so staff don't have significant concerns about sort of the social and economic and environmental limits to growth that are noted within the vision to action plan, because it's a fairly low density development, even though it is an increase in density for the subject property. The OCP does support the project. No affordable housing is being considered, and that's something that we talk about a lot through all these rezoning applications. However, something that doesn't come up as much is a significant environmental benefit, which is the major benefit here that staff have identified through this particular application. Looking at the housing needs assessment, again, no non-market housing, but it is generally supportive of densification in the area and the removal of short-term rental permissions. Multimodal transportation plan, it is reasonably close to the downtown core. There's good access to public amenities such as Tonkin Park. However, there's a noted lack of pedestrian infrastructure. Staff are hoping to continue to work with the applicants to see what might be done about that. However, in this particular case, because it's a fairly low density development and the actual frontage on Tonkin Park Road is fairly small, this may not be the application where we are able to add a lot of pedestrian infrastructure to that particular area, but something to keep in mind. And the land use and demand study is generally supportive, talks about needing all kinds of housing. There's no real prioritized typology within the land use demand study, so we typically look to our OCP and housing needs assessment to kind of understand what it is that we want. However, the land use and demand study basically says that more housing is a good thing and densification in this area. The zoning bylaw currently has established the property as A2. That's a fairly low density, large lot, somewhat rural in nature type of zoning. The proposed changes would really be to include, to lower the minimum lot size to facilitate the proposed subdivision. We would also maybe adjust minimum lot widths, and then we would also be looking to remove any short-term rental or bed and breakfast permissions on the lots moving forward. There may be some also adjustments to setbacks and things like that. However, staff will take a little bit of a closer look at that when we actually go to draft the bylaw in comparison to the proposed subdivision plan. Few of the planning considerations that staff identified at this point. From a form and character perspective, there's not a lot to comment on. We're looking at a subdivision only. The layout of the subdivision does seem acceptable at this point in time. We will be referring it to our approving officer following a successful first reading if the application moves forward that far, looking for comments, things to be aware of that would be good to address at this point, understanding that this is really a rezoning done to set up a subdivision. Housing, no affordable housing provisions, but there'll be removal of short-term rental permissions, which may provide additional long-term rental opportunities for current community members. It is important to note that a lot of these lots are fairly large in size, so considering them as affordable lots is probably the incorrect way to characterize them. However, given that there will be at least 2 units on each of these lots, it may provide some opportunities for certain families to get into the housing market. No initial concerns around traffic and access. We will be referring this application to our engineering department in case they have any comments around there. But again, fairly low density. There's already an established access point to 2 of the properties. That access point will likely be turned into a strata road should the subdivision move forward as it's being proposed. But due to the low density, there's no significant concerns around traffic and access at this point in time. Servicing, we will be looking for a servicing brief. We'll probably run our water modeling in this situation as we are increasing density in the area, just to make sure that we have the requisite infrastructure to support the development. The environment, I've mentioned this a couple times already, but there does seem to be a reasonable balance between development and environmental protections. That's one of the key points for this particular, the future homes designation within the official community plan, is looking to gently add density in these areas, but also ensure that this doesn't compromise the environment in an unacceptable way. And there's no real concerns of flooding or tsunami inundation within any of the areas proposed for development. There is a small portion of the property that is subject to inundation. However, that's an area that would be designated as parkland should the project move forward. A few other considerations, we will be going through the full referral process, which will help us get some more information following first reading, should the application proceed that far. The one other thing that I wanted to note is through this subdivision, we would be creating 3 new lots. So there's 1 lot, it's going to 4 lots, the difference is 3. That would trigger a particular requirement of the Local Government Act to provide at least 5% of parent parcel as parkland dedication. So even in the case that the applicant was not offering any parkland at all, we would still be taking 5% of the parkland through the subdivision process. What we've done previously in a situation where the subdivision taking parkland was not deemed necessary through the subdivision would be to reduce that parkland dedication from 5% to 0%, which is effectively waiving the parkland dedication. In this case, staff recommends that we take the parkland through the rezoning process as the subdivision isn't guaranteed, and part of staff support for this rezoning is contingent on us receiving this parkland. However, then when it comes to the subdivision process, understanding that we've already received a significant parkland dedication, we would look to reduce that requirement at that stage down to 0%. Another way to do it, which would be slightly more complicated, but would require that variance, would be to essentially take all the parkland minus 5% at this point, and then through the subdivision receive that final 5%, which I believe is about 0.4 of an acre, if I remember my calculations correctly. So at this point, that's something that staff will probably present council with some more options should we decide to proceed today. But at this point, staff are recommending that we look to receive that amenity through this rezoning, and then during the subdivision process, we don't ask for any additional park. Emergency services will also be consulted through the referral. Staff note that there is a fire hydrant that was recently installed at the entrance to the property as a result of that previous subdivision. The CAC was estimated at about $6,000 based on the guidelines. Applicants have offered a significant parkland dedication at this point in time. Staff are recommending holding a public hearing. This particular application is in line with the OCP. However, it's in an area of the town that really hasn't seen development for quite a significant amount of time. So it does seem reasonable to have some sort of public consultation. Public hearing is one way to do that. If the council is not in favor of a public hearing, a public information session may be also appropriate, or both should council decide in that direction. So the recommendations on the board, staff are currently recommending that we grant permission to proceed with further review of the application. There are a few other motions there as well that would be appropriate should council choose to move in a different direction, and I'm happy to answer any questions at this point.
Super, thank you, Mr. Thick. We'll open it up for council for questions for Mr. Thick. And if there's comments to follow, we can do that as well. Councillor Steer, go ahead.
Just a quick question. In the A2 zoning, they wanted to retain a home occupation. I went to look at the A2 home occupation potential. Could you remind me what some of those home occupation potentials are for that particular property that they want to retain on home occupation?
Sure, thank you for the question through the chair. Councillor Steer, the home occupations are fairly broad in these cases for these kind of larger rural properties. They run the gamut from anything from a home bookkeeping business all the way up to I believe you can have kind of like small kind of agricultural operations. The one thing that isn't really permitted is any sort of retail or I mean, a good way to kind of characterize it is if people have to come to your house and come into your house to buy things regularly, that's typically not something that's supported. An exception to that might be something like an artist studio. Say if you had a pottery studio and you were selling some of your work out of your studio, that would be acceptable if it's a home studio, or if you're running a massage therapy clinic. But the idea is not to run a full retail commercial kind of place there. The only kind of home occupation permissions that would be removed as noted would be short-term rental permissions. So those, we consider those as a home occupation within our zoning bylaw. However, all other home occupation permissions would be maintained. The overarching goal, I don't actually have a list in my head of exactly what would be permitted, but the overarching goal is to ensure that whatever occupations occur on the property don't change the essentially residential nature of those properties.
Any questions, Councillor Anderson?
Just observing some of the maps that were provided around the lot. There seems to be some street dedications that I suppose were laid down in a grid style at some point in the past, regardless of topography or any environmental considerations, I think. I'm just wondering, and maybe this particular zoning question doesn't really trigger any of these things, but I wouldn't mind at some point, and maybe not even part of this application, some discussion on council about some of these street dedications and whether they will remain in place and potentially be used in the future, or maybe it's time that we looked at putting them to other use or retaining them as green space or something like that. Since this report didn't consider or didn't address anything about that or possible access that might be needed to these lots through those street dedications. I guess my question is, would future reports on this zoning address that at all, or is that something that's sort of not really impacted by this application?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, Councillor Anderson, the current proposal is to access all of the subdivided properties on the parcel from Tonkin Park Road. So I think the undeveloped right of way that I think you're referring to is Cedar Street, which like the first couple hundred meters are developed. You can access it off of Arnett Road just before you turn up onto Tonkin Park Road. But from there, it's still a dedicated road right of way from, as you mentioned, quite a long time ago when things were just kind of laid down at some point. But it's never been developed because there has never been any need to develop it. There's been no development to access through that road. This particular proposal would be accessed by, it would likely take the form of a strata subdivision should the rezoning be approved and the subdivision move forward as planned. And the current access to one of the lots, which is by easement, which is typically acceptable for one lot, but if we're going to have access to multiple lots, it gets kind of a little bit cumbersome if you're accessing it by easement. That easement would be turned into a strata road that would be owned by all the various properties that front on. So the Cedar Street right of way would likely remain completely undeveloped through this development application. At some point in the future, maybe that'll change, but currently I don't anticipate anything like that.
Just to be clear, I'm not looking to have it developed. I'm looking of maybe putting it to some other use if we're never going to use it as a street. So that's yeah.
That's a good question.
Any further questions? Yes. Go ahead.
Through the chair. My question is just regarding if it's going to be developed as a strata property, so it'd be a strata managed road, how would that affect like the dark sky policy with lighting? Like, would they be required to, would they follow the same rules as us or?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair, Councillor Sloman. Typically, when we are working through any sorts of developments on these kinds of property, there's actually 3 development permit areas that impact this property. One is the wildlife habitat area, the other is the riparian development permit area, and the third is the steep slopes development permit area. When we issue those development permits, as a condition of those development permits, we require that all lighting on the site must meet the dark sky policy. My experience with strata roads has been that they typically don't have very much lighting on them because it's not an asset that's owned by the municipality or maintained by the municipality. It's owned and maintained by the owners. And they would probably prefer to not have less infrastructure to pay for there rather than more. So in this case, we would be at the subdivision stage, we'd be issuing those development permits that require them to have all lighting meet the dark sky policy. And then any sorts of road rights of ways would be reviewed by our engineering department, as well as any lighting, should they choose to put lighting on that road.
And then through the chair for me, I just have one more question regarding the CAC guidelines. Those were set in 2016. Do you think it's possibly time that those are relooked at or?
To the chair, yeah, thank you for the question. I do think it's probably time that they're relooked at. We actually have, I think, a little bit of money put away in our budget as a project this year to work with some land use economists and other people to make sure that our CICs are keeping up with the cost of construction, values of land, and really the needs of the community. So it is something that's on staff's list to essentially tick off this year, and probably something that we'll be talking about with council next little while.
Super. I have a question and then a comment. Maybe we can go on some comments so we can give both the applicant and staff some direction beyond our motion, if that's applicable. For significant trees, there's the applicants noted significant old growth trees on the property, both in the parkland, proposed parkland portion, as well as the residential lots. At what point would staff consider the significant tree bylaw applying to those trees? Is that something that happens right now at the zoning or the development stage?
Thank you for the question, Mayor. Typically that happens at the zoning stage. So our existing significant tree bylaw only protects trees that are explicitly listed on, I believe it's Schedule A to the bylaw. What we've done historically is through this rezoning stage is we've actually added specific trees as deemed necessary to that list. So in this case, maybe as a condition of rezoning, we would ask each of the applicants, we would ask the applicants to provide us a survey showing what they've already kind of done, showing where the significant trees are, and we would add that to the significant tree bylaw to ensure that whatever trees are noted there are protected in perpetuity. The only other comment I would make about that is that it may be the case that I believe they've actually already done a little bit of this work, but what we were looking to lay out where the building sites are on the lots before they're even created, to ensure that we understand which trees are protected and that we're approaching it in as sensitive an approach as is possible in this particular case. And then, sorry, one more comment that I would make about that is occasionally when it comes to the grading and preparation of building sites, you may look to constrain it to a certain area, but due to the topography and due to the way that the works are done, sometimes that area is increased. So this would be something that I think is appropriate to introduce that zoning, and maybe as part of a covenant that's brought in towards the end of the zoning process, should we make it that far. But it would also require some conversation with the applicants to be sure that I think they're on board with adding those sorts of trees or protecting those trees, but just to be sure that we're not compromising the lots or kind of defeating the purpose of the zoning by instead just trying to save every single tree and having that basically disallow any sort of development of the lot. So something to answer the question a little bit more shortly, it would be something that's appropriate in zoning, but something that I'd like to continue discussing with the applicants and maybe have a bit of a more clear proposal for council either at first or second reading.
Great. And it was my intention that those trees that they wanted to protect, listed to protect, would be protected. That was the purpose of, not to hinder the development of those small lot building sites. Great. That was my one question. Comments. I'll start out with comments just for your benefit. Oh, you have a question?
No, it was going to be a comment.
Okay. Why don't I go from, since I'm already here, I'll do the little comment, and then this is really for your benefit, Mr. Thick, and the applicants too. Is I like this proposal. I think it. The parkland is a real sell for me. It does follow our vision to action plan to promote parks, natural green spaces, and to protect sensitive ecosystems and natural areas. So I do like this. I like the proposal from the applicants. I would prefer to see significant trees designated, not to hinder the sites that they have, or to make it an exercise in futility, but to actually put something in place that would actually protect the trees that the applicants want to be protected as well, and we would want to protect them. So that's what I have to say, and I'd be happy to noting all that. I'd be happy. My own personal opinion is to forego the $6,000 in noting the parkland dedication and the applicant's desire to protect and preserve a good portion of the lots themselves. That's my comment, and I'll just open up to council. Go ahead. Actually, Council Steer first, and then Mr. Swart.
I was just one of the pieces of information you were looking for was around the public hearing. I would be supportive of not having a public hearing, just a public information session. I think they've laid out in the report and the submissions that they made a lot of great information on there. This is non-controversial. I agree that it is a slight change to that neighborhood area, but I think they're very conscientious applicant, and I would be very comfortable with just a public information session in this particular case, noting that even at this stage, there was no comments from the public on this through the agenda. And then the other part, it raises in the report a little bit the active transportation infrastructure in general questions, and know through in that particular, there is very little to no infrastructure around there. And as we are promoting more of that active transportation infrastructure, it might be something not particular for this, but in general, that we might start considering that a little more in these rezoning applications, if appropriate in that sense. So, because we know how important that's going to be, especially in that particular neighborhood with the development going on in DL 114, et cetera, et cetera. So, thank you.
Mr. Sawyer.
Yeah, I would follow up on your comments that I do support the project, especially because of the removal of the SDR allowances. And I would be greatly in favor of seeing the significant trees that the applicant wishes to protect added to our list. And that, you know, if that was the case, then the parkland dedication as well, $6,000 could be overlooked.
Yeah, I like the proposal. My only hesitation is I heard on the street, and we know the street's never wrong, that when the applicant initially purchased this property, they actually got an extra 3 acres because of a survey error. So, I mean, if that is true, you know, they got 3 and they're giving back 2.7. So if there's some way you could look into that, would be great.
Bit of hearsay there, but we'll see. I'm not sure. Okay, comment noted. Comments, anybody else would like to comment? Yes, Thomas, Councillor Thomas.
I was just going to say I'm in favor of Councillor Steer's suggestion to do an information session rather than a public hearing, because I think they've approached this really nicely with laying it out with consideration of all of the environmental stuff, as everybody's noted. And I like your suggestion for staff's situation of dealing with it with accepting the parkland donation and then taking it from 5 to 0%, because that seems more straightforward. That's all.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
Yep, I'm in favor of proceeding as the resolution, suggested resolution before us states. I think it's rather a breath of fresh air to see a parkland contribution proposed beyond what is merely required. And I think that's great at a time when we look at you know, adding to Tonquin Park and trying to mitigate some of the impacts that are taking place due to our both our sewage outfall and some of the development on District Lot 114. So yes, and I agree with earlier councillors that if we can get some more significant trees dedicated by bylaw, that would be great. Okay.
I agree. I like this proposal. I really like the dedication of the parkland. And I really appreciate the removal of the short-term vacation rentals and the bed and breakfast use. For me, that is a great deal.
Okay, sounds like you got lots of support. So I think the general recommendation will be supported, no problem. We do have 2 councillors that have noted that they would like to forego a public hearing in favor of a public information session. So I think that's something that we can talk to council about. Did you have your hand up, Ms. Larson? Sorry.
Oh,
No, I thought you were going to chime in there. So let me just ask a quick round of council, where council's at with that. We've heard from 2 councillors about public hearing. We can either do an amendment, we can leave this off, or we can change it. Councillor Anderson?
I don't know, I guess I should have asked this question earlier, but I'm just wondering before we go into that discussion, I'd maybe like to hear from staff why they did recommend a public hearing,
Perfect.
because it's not addressed in the report.
Perfect. Let's, Mr. Thick.
Thank you for the question through the chair. In this case, staff recommend a public hearing because, as noted, it is a bit of a development change in an area that hasn't seen much development in recent years. And the reason that we sort of recommended a public hearing was because the public hearing is a reasonable and established approach to gathering public input. A public information session is also sometimes quite useful. However, as has been noted, sometimes it takes significant staff time and may or may not be fruitful. Either way is acceptable to staff. We're happy to kind of follow along with whatever council decides is appropriate in this case. The major difference I would note is that typically we move through the public hearing process following second reading. So some significant work has already been done. And the public information session typically we schedule after first reading, and it's a little bit more informal, and so can often act as a slightly earlier and less high pressure opportunity for the public to come and speak to a particular application should they wish to. The other sort of significant difference with public hearings is that public hearing does have typically a formal record held and is part of the rezoning file in perpetuity. So there's a few more legislative requirements associated with it, which sometimes lends it a little bit more, at least perceived authority. However, a public information session is also sometimes less formal, maybe more appropriate way to gather just feedback from the general public who may otherwise be intimidated by public hearing.
Thank you. Councillor Sawyer.
Yeah, in response to that answer through the chair, that is why I think a lot of myself included, councillors would be in favor of the public information session, because I believe the majority of people who would be commenting in the public hearing after, the second hearing or the second review, we would be getting a lot of information that would be too late to do anything with. And so, yeah, that is my understanding of why the public information center session is preferable.
I have no preference either way. So
If we can make one suggestion, if you would like, I'm happy to help craft some language to change the recommendation for the public hearing if council decides to instead, in lieu of a public hearing, hold a public information session.
sure. I could just get a question for you just to clarify, Mr. Thick, was it the public information session would be more work for staff? Or
Yeah, typically that's the case. We have a fairly well-established process that puts the onus a little bit at least on the applicant to provide some signage and things like that prior to the public hearing. While the public information session, at least in my opinion, can sometimes be more useful as it happens a little bit earlier in the process and garners a little bit more informal conversation, which often leads to more worthwhile implementation of public opinion into a particular development proposal. It can also just be a little bit of a bunch of work for staff without too much result, particularly in the case of an application like this, which is seemingly well supported by council at this point and also relatively well supported by the community, as evidenced by no opposition or comments thus far. However, that being said, staff are completely happy to move forward with whichever approach the council would like to do.
And then just before I go to Councillor Steer, I just want to clarify for council, because what I think I'm hearing you say is that for some developments that would require perhaps a lot of public input early on, that would result in changes, then a public information session would be more staff time, but more ideal in something like this, which has garnered great support from council. A public hearing later on in the process would be more beneficial. That's what I think what I'm hearing. So,
Yeah,
kind of.
that's correct. I would say that's a good way to characterize it. The one other opportunity that I would point out to council at this point in time is that neither a public hearing nor a public information session is necessary if we're looking to move this application forward in the most expedient way possible. Essentially, just not holding either of those things can also happen.
That was my question.
Okay, there's your question. Okay, so yeah, okay, that's
That's what I was
there you
leading
go.
to.
Okay. Okay, well, does that help council a little bit? Helps, certainly helps me clarify the difference between. Personally, I'm just gonna throw that out here, noting that I think that we have some unanimous support, great support for this, generally for this project. I think we could go none at all, but I think that's probably not a good idea. So I personally think maybe we should just stick with it here, but I'm gonna. Councillor Steer, since you brought it up first.
Yeah, maybe just, well, because it was asked within the report and one of the, in terms of the process, if it fits well within an OCP, I think part of the legislation that the province had given the authority to do is to waive those public hearings, was to expedite the process to make it simpler and faster. And what I'm hearing is conflicting with what I had in mind. So maybe, I don't know if I need any more clarification, but would it not be quicker than to forego the public hearing, have the public information to expedite this a little quicker?
Thanks for the question to the chair. That is correct. That's sort of one way to approach it. In my experience working as a planner here, at the end of the day, it tends to kind of come out in the wash. If it's a couple of weeks here and there, it really doesn't make that large of a difference. Again, I guess speaking somewhat candidly, maybe the reason that staff initially supported a public hearing was because it seemed like it was a fairly well supported development. We'd like to move it forward and spend less staff time on it. It's maybe the easiest way to describe it, or the most candid way to describe it.
Okay.
The one other thing that I would say is that regardless of whether we hold a public hearing or not, notifications will be going out to all neighboring properties, and there will be ads placed in the Westerly News related. So there is essentially the exact same notification process is followed whether we hold a public hearing or not. It's just that the actual public hearing itself does not take place if we decide not to hold a public hearing.
Super. Okay. Well, I think the way forward is just to read the motion as written down, and we'll give councillors a chance to debate the motion. That's I think would be reasonable. And then if people really strongly want to debate the public hearing or no public hearing and depart from staff's recommendations, we can do that within the motion. I think that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So who would like to read that recommendation?
You do it.
Thank you.
Move that staff proceed with further review of the zoning amendment application for 320 Tonquin Park Road, and that a public hearing be held in association with the application.
Second, I have a seconder. Councillor Sloman. Okay, comments. Now is the time to debate your opinion. If you want this changed, we can amend it. If not, we're going to go ahead and call the question. So, Councillor McMaster.
I'd say stick with the public hearing, knowing how short-staffed the planning department is and how overworked they are. So I would say want staff time and go with the public hearing process.
Okay. Councillor Sloman. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I agree that I would like to see a public hearing instead of an information center session. I think that would be nice in that area because, as stated, they haven't seen a lot of development. So I think that I agree with the recommendation.
Sure. So before I go to Councillor Anderson, is anybody going to oppose this? Okay, I'm calling the question. Is that okay, Councillor Anderson? We can just forego the comments. Okay, all in favor? Okay, none opposed, motion carried. Thank you. Great. I think that's fine. All right. 10.3, we have a temporary use permit for 675 Ocean Park Drive.
765?
What do we got here? 765. I have it 765.
You said 675.
Did I say 6? Ms. Kreba, it's wonderful to see you in person.
Good evening.
Kreba, not Kreba. Kreba. Good, kind of correct me. Thank you for the correction, Ms. Kreba. Wonderful to see you in person.
It's lovely to be here. Actually, I don't think I'll need this, but this evening I'm going to be presenting the temporary use permit application for 765 Ocean Park Drive. Just have to adjust to the new surroundings here. So, as mentioned, so the 765 Ocean Park Drive is located within the Ocean Park neighborhood. So that is otherwise known as the Ocean Park Comprehensive Development Zone, CDOP. And this is within the Peninsula land use designation, which is predominantly residential area. The applicant seeks to continue the use of their RV for long-term accommodation. So the applicant is requesting a 3-year term to offset their short-term housing need, but staff are recommending a term of 1 year. Some evaluation highlights. This proposal is considered to be a short-term land use opportunity when considering temporary use permit applications, being either a bridge to permanent change of use, short-term land use opportunity, or innovation, etc. So we evaluate it as per the land use opportunity. It does not fully align with the OCP policy that's identified for temporary use permits. But it does generally align with the OCP policy for the development of housing in that it meets the immediate need for affordable and attainable housing. Through this process, I wanted to sort of delve into the consultation process just a little bit further than I normally do. There are 2 parts to the consultation, and that one is a stakeholder referral. And so that goes out to, for example, the Strata Council. And then there's also the public notification component. So this is the notification that gets mailed and hand delivered to a 60-meter radius of the subject lot. And that's within 10 days of the meeting. It's also posted in the Westerly News in 2 editions. So there's opportunity for comment from residents of Tofino outside of the immediate area. And so as council received in the last couple of days, we have received a significant amount of written submission in support of the application. So the consultation for the stakeholder referral did result in a letter from, it was the Strata Management Company that drafted the letter on behalf of the Strata Council that, in fact is supposed to represent the collective interests of the entire community. But as we've seen with the letters of support that were submitted to me over the last few days, there was a number of residents within the strata itself, as well as within the community, that were very much in favor of this application. So the letter that was received from the referral did not reflect the collective aspirations or the collective interests of the neighborhood. So I thought I should mention that. So the short and sweet presentation. I'm going to note that staff are recommending a term of 1 year, and this was largely rooted in the balancing of the interests, both public and private. As we know, the district is challenged with housing challenges, but we have a public interest in that the district is requiring permanent housing stock. So that in consideration, we're still recommending 1 year, but noting that council does have discretion to either accept, reduce, or expand on that term. So I look forward to answering any questions.
Super. Thank you very much, Ms. Reba. Is that right? Never gonna forget. Okay, council, do we have any questions for Ms. Reba? Councilor McMaster?
The 28 letters of support you mentioned, there was some outside the 60 meters and some, how many were within the 60 meters?
Without having them in front of me, I did read every single one that came in and sort of mentally noted the locations of the addresses were noted in a lot of the letters. And I was particularly looking for neighbors that were in the directly adjacent to the subject lot. And so I would say it's at least 50%, maybe more, of the letters that were received that are from the strata itself. And then a number of property owners that don't reside within the neighborhood, but own properties and then outside of the neighborhood. But each one was received from a resident of Tofino. So through the chair, apologies.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Zurich.
I had questions to the chair. Noted in the report, there are concerns that the shipping container present without a permit. Would that affect staff's feelings on the application being extended to 3 years if they were to seek permits for a shipping container?
So this was through the chair. Appreciate the question. This was a challenging one for staff in that the shipping container it's not a component of the application, so it's difficult to evaluate the shipping container presence outside of sort of the overall visual nuisance that it may create. There have been no formal enforcement. There has been no formal enforcement action taken. There's been no complaints received, and so I feel as though in evaluating the term of the TUP, the shipping container is not a consideration. If it was, the subject of a lot of complaints, then that would probably be looked at more closely. But given that it does provide a certain amount of screening to the property or to the lot, it could be sort of viewed both ways, as positive and negative.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Steer.
Thank you. And through the chair. Just curious as to staff's recommendations for a year. The applicant is looking for that 3 year. You explained a little bit why staff's recommendation for the 1 year. Maybe you could just reiterate that again, please.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you for the question. So the 1 year term was based on the essentially rounding out the full 3 year term, because they had requested a 3 year term initially for the first application, and council had approved a 2 year term. So in order to sort of, as I mentioned, round out that 3 years, granting the 1 year in recognition that there are competing priorities here, being housing and then the public interest as well. So the reduced term was sort of in response, was a bit of a compromise between those competing priorities. Given that there is an absence of policy for long-term accommodation in an RV, a recreational vehicle, it's difficult for staff to approach it. We have to come across or come at this from a very objective view. We're sort of evaluating through the policy that's established through the OCP and other relevant documentation. Council has a bit more of an opportunity to be a bit more subjective in that regard. And so it was in response to sort of the lack of policy support for the RV specifically, but also balancing the needs for immediate housing.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I was just slightly related. When a building permit is issued, is there the opportunity, and you'll have, my memory needs to be jogged. Once a building permit is pulled, the applicant could live in an RV until while the construction period is going on for that particular building permit. How long is there a time frame associated with that? So make the question simple. If they were to pull a building permit, how much time would they have to complete the project and be able to reside within that trailer?
Through the chair, thank you for the comment or question. So I did speak with the building inspector about this as well, and I think just generally in the district there is a little bit of flexibility. A lot of stratas do have building schemes that sort of put timeframes on the amount of time that you're able to take to build from the start of the building permit being pulled to the completion of the development. In Ocean Park, there isn't, to my understanding, there aren't any restrictions. So it really is case by case. I believe that there could be a number of years in which the applicant could reside in the RV. I think it's also important to note that if upon the TUP expiry, assuming that the 1 year is granted, there are no guarantees that the applicant will be in a position to apply for a building permit at that 1 year. So we're essentially we're basing our evaluation or our assumption that the building permit will be applied for at 1 year when there's no guarantees for that.
Okay.
That answered.
Okay, Councillor Anderson.
The question is around the shipping container. I'm not really sure, but I believe we did pass some bylaw that addresses how shipping containers can be used, how they might be screened, and how they might be ventilated. I'm not sure if the bylaw had that, but I'm just wondering what would it take to bring that shipping container, if it is out of compliance, into compliance? I am in support of extending the temporary use permit probably beyond the term of a year, but I'm wondering if this is an opportunity to address that shipping container, whether it needs a building permit to be located there, whether it needs to be screened or otherwise altered to come into compliance with the guidelines we have around shipping containers and locating them on residential property. So my question is in and around the shipping container. If this is an opportunity to bring that into compliance at the same time. And I looked at the previous temporary use permit, it didn't address shipping container or other buildings at all, so.
Maybe before you tackle that, because it's a little bit off, I know it's not in the report, the shipping container, it's been talked about, mentioned a couple times, but just debate, I'm wondering how we can maybe address this without actually getting into shipping containers for this TUP, but I'll let you take a stab at it, but then I'll jump in if.
Challenge accepted.
Okay.
Through the chair. Thank you for your question. So my initial report did explore a little bit further into the presence of the shipping container, but as I mentioned, it wasn't a component of this application, and because the district, the enforcement policy is largely enforcement based, the absence of complaint at all, I would caution utilizing the temporary use permit as a mechanism in order to bring the rest of the property into compliance. Sort of the issue of the shipping container can be addressed at the time of building permit application. It can be addressed through the development variance permit application process as well. So if there was a complaint received, this would be something we could easily address. There are tools in place to be able to utilize that shipping container for storage purposes. Because you are correct, we did adopt a bylaw and amendment in which we do now regulate shipping containers. But again, we don't enforce upon them unless there's been a complaint received. So in order to bring that into compliance, we'd have to respect the setbacks. That was one of the considerations, ensuring that because the shipping container has to be placed within, it has to respect the setbacks of the lot. And then there's also a limitation for putting accessory structures on a principal or on a subject lot prior to principal building. And so without the presence of a principal building, because we're sort of operating with this under the temporary use umbrella, it's definitely a larger conversation. But I would say that the trigger should be the enforcement mechanism, not the two.
Or building.
Or building permit.
I'll just park that.
Okay.
It's a good question. I just careful how we handle it here. Okay, well, interesting. I don't know. Any other questions? I have a question just for my own knowledge is what is required for an applicant to submit a building application, like a permit? We call it pulling a permit, but if we're talking about timeframes, if this applicant was able to do that process, what is required to get that application?
So thank you for the question, Mirla. So there are a number of items that would be required prior to just submitting an application form. There's an entire checklist, and it is really site specific. So depending on, speak to this lot in particular, there may be geotechnical hazard assessments required. There may be, they're not subject to development permit area regulations, so there's no environmental assessment requirement. But in order to sort of move forward with a lot of those reports or those assessments that would be required through the process. A building design would be the first step. So having the property surveyed, having a site plan established. So it would really come down to having a full comprehensive plan prior to submitting your application. It is really site specific based on, and I can't comment too much on that process because it is managed by the building inspector, but just sort of in my sort of experience and seeing some of the applications that have come forward, they can be quite extensive.
Super. Any other questions for Ms. Kriva? We can let her off the hook and then we can have a comment about before we go in and read the recommendation. Seeing none, okay, we're gonna go into a little bit of a comment, a pre-motion comment period, maybe with council. If that's what council wants to do, or we can read the motion and then debate it within the motion. Councillor Sawyer.
Actually, I'll hold that for debate.
Maybe there's a good question from council. Is council generally ready to read this motion as written and debated, or?
My only concern about that is the length of the recommended length. I would like to have a conversation around that.
Well, I think that's what we should do. Yeah.
Because if we were to read the recommendation, I would support a longer time frame, and I think that's maybe where, if we were to have a debate at this point in time, where I'd be 1 year, I don't think is appropriate based on the information that was brought forward and the circumstances around Tofino in general, as we know, in terms of this applicant is absolutely wants to move forward to provide long-term accommodation. I've known Philippe a long time, and I know absolutely a home is what he is after. And the complications of this particular one, I know that's not generally our purview, but I would like an extension on that 1 year time frame. And I would open that up to council what they thought might be appropriate on that.
Okay, let's do that. Let's talk about that. Councillor Steer, do you have a significant time that you think would be appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, when I was thinking about this, and that was a question directed around the building permit and the ability to give the applicant time to come up with a building permit, as well as I know there's some financing questions, but at the same time, pulling a building permit would then be able to, in essence, extend that time frame around building. So I would certainly be comfortable with looking at a 2 and even as far as the 3 year, and I'd like to hear what the rest of council might feel on that.
Okay, let's do that. Councillor Stark.
I would be in favor of 2 or 3 years. I feel that 2 would perhaps be a good compromise between what staff's asking for and what the applicant's asking for.
Okay, thank you. Let's keep it brief and just that kind of comment. Councillor Sloman.
I would like to see it at 3 years. Because I know personally, I can't even get a deck bill or even a quote within a year. So I think 2 years isn't quite enough for a home, and I think 3 years would be more appropriate.
Great. Councillor.
I would meet in the middle at 2.
2.
I just think he's had 2 years, and I understand there's like life situations and things that have happened, but if there's been no movement forward on it, I don't necessarily feel that there might be movement in the next 2 years even.
Okay, Councillor Anderson.
2 or 3 year term should be plenty of time to be able to move. I understand that there's circumstances that are personal to the applicant that makes it difficult, but I think when we first discussed the first temporary use permit on this, we shortened the term to try and encourage some movement on it. So.
Okay. Councillor McMaster.
I would go for 2 years. I'm always reluctant to give the second term longer than the initial proposal. So I think 1 year is harsh in this climate, and I'd be happy with 2 years.
Okay, I can see the majority of council thinks 2 years is probably reasonable and livable. Certainly nobody's mentioned 1 year, so I'm going to go ahead and read the recommendation for 2 years. And if there's significant debate, we can amend it. So from the chair, I'll move that the temporary use permit attached as Appendix 1 to report titled Temporary Use Permit Renewal, 765 Ocean Park Drive, long-term camping dated March 28th, 2023, to permit the use of recreation vehicle for long-term accommodation for a period of 2 years be approved for issuance. Second by Councillor Steer. Any debates? Now's the time to debate. Councillor,
Just one last comment. I understand staff's strict interpretation, and there isn't that much room to make any other recommendation other than the 1 year is actually being generous from their interpretation of the current policies and bylaws in effect. So, yeah, I'm in support of 2 year.
2 years. Okay, super. Excellent. Any further comments from council? All in favor? Unopposed, motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Kripa. We're going to have a, yeah, you want to make a little
2 minute bathroom break.
5 minutes, we'll call a 5 minute recess. Point for groups. Thank you.
That way you can watch.
Moving on to downtown paid parking. We have a PowerPoint from Mr. Rogers.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This evening, I'll be presenting on an award of our paid parking contract for downtown core and its implementation. I'd like to start always with the paid parking slides about why we're doing this. These strategic priorities come from Council's current plan. We have a strategic priority to expand municipal revenue sources. The district, receives funds through taxation fees. This is one more stream to receive fees for parking on public property. And secondly, we want to incentivize, prioritize, and emphasize a rapid transition to sustainable mobility. This lines up with our multimodal transportation plan and our official community plan policies. A little bit of background, we're into phase 2 of the parking program. It was originally created to help alleviate some pressures that we were feeling, some negative impacts due to safety, road conditions, and overall busyness of parking. The first phase of this was beach parking in 2021, and our proponent or our consultant who operates that system for us is Robbins Parking. In terms of the downtown parking contract and award, staff went with a notice of intent rather than a request for proposals, with the understanding this was going to be a fairly short contract. We already had a contractor in place. The notice of intent went up onto BC bid for about 2 weeks. We didn't receive any challenges to the notice of intent, and then following that process, Robbins provided us with a proposal. A little bit of the details of what downtown paid parking might look like this year. Again, the idea of this is to ensure that we have availability of parking spaces. So by pricing spaces, we expect to see turnover, meaning there'll be open spaces for people to park in. We are again pursuing a mode shift to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles and into other forms of transportation, particularly our seasonal shuttle and cycling. Again, as I addressed earlier, creating another revenue stream. The program is based off the existing and timed offshore system. So basically the system we currently have in place with our offshore program and our time parking will become the beach pay or the downtown pay parking program. The offshore parking plan will be separate. It is separate from the beach pay parking system. These are 2 separate programs with 2 separate needs. So we will be running 2 programs. It's expected to be seasonal, so beginning of May to the end of October. You can park in Tofino for free anytime between 6 and 9:59 a.m. And the rest of the days during the seasonal May to October, you'll be paying at the various kiosks or by phone. Our plan is to have a progressive pricing system. I'll get into that a little bit on the next slide. And again, it's similar to the beach program in the essence that the kiosks are going to be similar. The contract is similar to our existing contract, and we're using the same contractor. So the intent of each space in the downtown core is to turn over about every 2.5 hours. That equates to about $4. And so over the length of a parking day, you probably see about $12 per space as revenue. Progressive pricing, what that means is that we're going to increase the rate of pricing every 2 hours, starting at $1.50 for the first 2 hours each, $1.50 for the first hour, $1.50 the second hour, $2 each for the next 2 hours, $2.50, and $3. In the end, if you parked in a space downtown from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., you would be spending about $18, which is similar to what you pay in many places on Vancouver Island for day-long parking. If you're there for a short period of time, for example, an hour, you'd be probably paying about $1.50. We're planning to offer downtown residents passes. We're going to start the conversation with two, potentially the first one being free and the second one being a paid pass. And that's to help people adjust to parking being paid in front of their residence where they may have parked for free for many decades. I expect the downtown resident parking pass system will be administered by the District of Tofino rather than moving it off to a third-party contractor like Robbins. And again, I just want to reiterate that there is no change to the offshore program. We may actually see a couple of new spaces closer to the docks, which is some of the feedback we've heard so far. So to stay tuned for that update. In terms of implementing the program, we're going to start with community engagement. It'll start most likely this Monday coming up if council decides to move forward with the project. We've met with the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation representatives a couple of weeks ago, had a great conversation and taken some of the feedback there and fed it back into the program. We expect to meet with other offshore stakeholders, the Chamber of Commerce, Tourism Tofino, the larger businesses, the smaller businesses, and Tofino residents over the next 4 to 6 weeks. If we move forward today, we'll begin the installation of kiosks and signs, and then start working on some policy and bylaw amendments to bring forward to council probably late or early May. The idea is to begin this program May 20th. That's, I would call it a soft date, but one that we're targeting. But there's parking is parking, and sometimes things come out of the woodwork. So for now, May 20th would be the date that we would start. Council asked us staff to go back and look at some options for beach pay parking increases for 2023. So we've done that. We have a couple of changes that we're proposing to increase revenue through the beach pay parking system. One would be having year-round parking here at the municipal lots, and the other one would be an increase to an hourly rate at the beach by 50 cents per hour, with a fairly significant net increase for Tofino. Again, taking with a grain of salt, these are estimates. It does depend on how many people come to Tofino and how many people are going to park in those areas. There are recommendations. If council is interested in moving forward with these increases, I would just need today just a nod from council saying that's what we'd like to do, and then I would return to council at the same time we're coming back for the downtown pay parking policy and bylaws with a projected rate increase. Pay parking reserve. We've talked a lot about this, but I think this conversation will be coming to a head fairly soon through the ongoing budget process. Currently, our 2021 and 2022 revenues are in a reserve fund. And again, as I said, this will come to discussion at the next budget meeting, I believe. So the recommendations, I won't read them out. I think you have them in front of you. I'd be happy to take any questions or reply to any comments as you see fit.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rogers. Questions from council? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Thank you. Just a question on, well, I got a couple, but it's a part of the comment. On the Robbins parking service contract was 152,898 plus GST. And then in the report, there was expenses of 210. And I was just curious what the discrepancy is.
So there'll be some costs related to percentage of revenue. There'll be some costs related to implementation, and for the other costs, I'd have to get back to councillors. But there's additional fees for us to get into this program. One thing I learned through conversations with Robbins is that we're in a rent-to-own model for our kiosks. And so through the length of the contract, once those are paid for, we should see a significant uptick in our revenues as a kiosk rental fees will be largely accommodated.
And a follow-up just through.
Yeah, yes.
And then it says there's two, once again, just for clarification, the initial one said a 6-month service contract. Then I saw in the report that it's for 1 year. I can't remember. I was a little confused by that. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's 6 months running from when the program starts to when the program ends, but we just did a year contract to that. So the system itself is over 6 months. The program is over 6 months. The contract is over 1 year. What that does is helps us with the month-to-month costs of those meters. The idea is for staff to come back to council in 2024 with a report to amalgamate the two programs into one contract.
Okay, and I'll save that for comment.
Councillor, go ahead.
I had a question through the chair that I wasn't here for the beach pay parking discussion, so it might have already been answered. Just looking at the fee structure for downtown parking and thinking about how to make the burden easier on people who don't live close to the downtown. Is there a reason, or will there be options offered like the 15-minute, half hour, 45-minute part? Because I'm thinking about, maybe someone who just has to pop into town, check the mail, and then drive back out to Cox Bay, not having to pay the financial burden on residents and perhaps increased turnover, because if someone's not paying for an hour, they'll be gone sooner. Whereas if they do pay, they might say, well, I'm going to leave my car here for a while then and go do more things.
It's a good question. It sort of comes to the heart of this conversation, which is as we make accommodation, we start to lose one of our principles. So our principles is maintaining parking turnover. Revenue is actually secondary. One of the issues we face is that we have one parking person in town. So the time they do the loop in the downtown core, drive out to the thing and do the loop at the beach or however they're going to set that up, we're not going to be able to deal with half-an-hour parkers. In the past with the beach program, there was a fair amount of forgiveness for the first 15 minutes or for half an hour. And I expect that'll be part of this program as people get used to it. There is free parking in Tofino before 10 o'clock and there's free parking after 6 o'clock and there's free parking the rest of the year. So it's not that we can't do that. We can ask our contractors to do whatever we wish. Prior to coming back to council, I'd want to ask Robbins to run those numbers and see what it would look like. So I'm not against the idea, but just I would be cautious about how far we went with that. It may be that something we can move to as well. We can see how the system works, see what kind of response we get back to the community, see what we hear from consultation, do a year, see what it feels like, and then adjust as we need.
Oh, thanks.
Councillor Master.
It's maybe a question for Robbins rather than itself. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of confusion initially that, like the beach parking ticket isn't going to be valid downtown and vice versa. Are the tickets going to look different?
No.
So, I mean, what I'm worried about is somebody gets a beach parking ticket and then just sticks it on the dash downtown.
So basically the way that we don't look at the tickets, we look at the license plates and location. So
Okay.
it's not, there's nobody's physically looking at tickets. It's just, they're scanning license plates as they drive by. And so when you go and pay for your parking, you plug in your license plate number, you get into the system, you're good to go. I've gone back and forth with trying to combine the two systems. I think what happens when you combine the beach system with the downtown parking is you start to lose the effectiveness of the program. So basically we had so much free parking downtown that what are we doing this for? In the first place, we see our revenues come down. We don't see congestion ease. I would like to be stand to be corrected, if we go through this year and it doesn't work either. But it's, this is something brand new for us. We know it works at the beach. Downtown parking is a little bit of a different animal.
Yeah, I like the way it's been proposed. I just think we're going to need a lot of education at the start.
I agree. I think that was a large part of the success of the program. In my review of the beach program was how much effort was expended and how much deep consultation was conducted by district staff and Robbins at the beginning of the process, plus a fairly lengthy ease-in program, which costs us money in the end, but makes for a system that people can live with generally. So part of the thing I'm a little bit worried about is that we did provide up to 3 cars for free parking on the beach. That's a lot. That's something that we will discuss in years to come about how many cars is appropriate per residence. I think that, yeah, I think I'll just leave that there.
Councillor Stewart, and then Councillor Steer, you guys,
I realized I had another question, wasn't a comment.
okay,
Yeah.
sure, go ahead. And then we better,
Yeah, this just follows up directly to what you were saying about the number of cars per household for the free permit. And I was seeing how we're looking at a model potentially of 1 car for free, 1 car offered at a discounted rate. And I was wondering if that's per household or per resident, looking at houses that may have 4 people living in them that each have their own car, would each of those people, so it would just be one of them?
It'll be per residential unit. So there's some stuff here that this is not going to help. Staff housing is going to be a very big one.
Or I'm even thinking of, you know, a married or common law couple that has 2 vehicles is what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot too, and what I've tried to do up to now. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing from council today and also from the community on whether this initial thing is right or wrong. I think the way that our bylaws are written, everybody should be providing all the parking for themselves on their lot. That's what our bylaws say. So if you have a duplex, you should have parking for both your cars. If you have a short-term rental, you should have parking for your 2 cars plus your guests. What's happened in Tofino and many other places, because it hasn't been an issue for us, is those have tended to spill out onto the public right of way, which we all pay for. How do you unwind that? I don't know. What you can do is encourage people to people to pay for what is that space they're actually using for the time they're using it. I don't know that. I don't know where I would start and where I would begin in trying to figure out what that right number is, whether it's 4 per lot or 3 per lot or 2 per lot, or started with 2 per lot as a kind of, you know, as they get with the understanding that people are probably parking 1 or 2 cars already on their property, and they're probably parking 1 or 2 cars on the road. I've been thinking a lot about the townhouses, where you might have a situation where most of the townhouses only have 1 parking spot, and then they have maybe 1 or 2 people living there. And how do we deal with that? So I don't know if I have an easy answer to your question. I do appreciate it, I'm looking forward to seeing what the community has to say about that and what the downtown residents have to say as well.
Well, thank you. My question was directly in line of thinking with the townhouses, as well as potentially the Headwaters project and the number of parking spots that are assigned to it and the number of people that will be living there.
Yeah.
And I do recognize from the graphs that it won't be paid parking directly in that neighborhood, but given that that will be the closest neighborhood outside of paid parking, and then with that added pressure.
Yeah, I would offer 2 comments. The first comment would be that the people who live downtown will also have the benefit of not paying for parking in the downtown core, largely because they will be able to walk most of the places. For example, the Headwaters is a 5-minute walk to the downtown core. I'm not suggesting everybody can walk, and it's available for everybody. And the second part is just basic, like some comment relates to just my past experience of being a planner, and the idea of us trying to move past building and planning for cars versus building and planning for people. And this is part of that conversation. It's not the entirety of it. And at some point as a society, I think it's incumbent on us to start figuring out what we want to park and where, like people or cars.
Well, thank you very much.
great, thank you. Councillor Steer? And I haven't seen any hands up over here, but I've been looking, so.
Yeah, and it relates into the report, and it's Modi, my favorite people in Campbell Street, and the conversations around. We're looking at some of the issues around the ownership of that, and I wonder if you could allude to maybe the implications of us taking over. I know that discussion maybe have started with Modi. What are the implications of us taking over Modi in terms of our responsibilities for that, and then the potential. The positives, I think I know, but maybe if you could speak to what potentially the negatives of that are.
Yes, through the chair to Councilor Steer, it's something I probably can't talk about at this meeting. This is really a meeting that we probably discuss in camera. I can tell you that there are no negotiations or conversations have started. We're going to get through this first process by implementing this new program, tweaking it, and then I expect that we'll be picking up the phone and reach out to Modi in the fall to start having a discussion. I'd probably defer to CEO, but I think that's where we're headed.
Fair enough, thank you.
Questions, Rogers? Just following on that, just for everybody's information, my information as well is Campbell Street will not be paid parking, but it will be reduced time limits for quicker turnover.
That's our expectation.
And then down First Street as well.
Exactly.
And then my second question, actually was kind of a compound question, is what has the public response been so far? And when we go into the official public, input phase, how much sway will the public have in changing any of this? Because we're entering into a contract, so it's not like we're going to pull out. We're entering it. This is what we're deciding. We're entering into a contract, and so is it like the other things? Like it's 80%, and then that 20% people will be able to sort of say, "I don't like it this way. I don't like it that way," or is it really kind of like 99%, and the public input is kind of more educational?
It's a great question. I'm going to attempt to answer as many pieces. So our public consult, I haven't heard anything back from the general public, partly because we haven't done any outreach in the first place, other than with our first stakeholder meeting with the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. So that's a meeting that we've had. I've set up meetings with various other organizations dependent on the outcome of today's meeting. I've spoken to our communications staff about rolling out a fairly comprehensive project starting Monday, if this happens. So up until now, I guess no one watches our council meetings, but no one's had any response.
It's 108 watching.
It's great.
No, it's not true, but
and I don't know if it's been in the West area yet either. So I haven't received a lot of feedback from the community. Obviously, I'm expecting that to turn on its head in the next week or so. In terms of what the amount of actual input the community will have on this program, it will be subject to council's decision today, limited to what the program looks like. We may talk a little bit about pricing a little bit. We might talk a little bit about resident passes. We may talk about hours a little bit. Can we shift it? Does 11 to 7 make more sense? Or does 9 to 5? Or does a 6 hour? Then what is that? What are the implications there for the financial aspects of it? So there's room to make some moves there, but to your point, it is limited. The real decision comes down today, and a decision that was also entered into in 2021 when we signed the contract with Robbins that suggests that we were going to do downtown parking. It was to come in 2022. We delayed because of the staffing turnover we had. So I'm coming back to you as a staff member saying, this is what council directed us to do in 2021. We paused in 2022. I've come to council in January this year to address this situation. Now this is the report. This is what the bones of it look like. So if I had to assign a percentage of how much is going to be available for people to modify, I would say 75 to 80% will be set, and 20 to 25% we're going to be able to move. Understanding that the 75% is the fact that we're just going to do it, or are we going to do it today? Is the decision? It's a big decision today. Today is an important point. If we don't move forward, we don't move forward.
Excellent. I see no other hands up for questions. I do have a comment. Actually, I have a comment, and that is something to keep in mind, especially for people listening. And if this impacts my decision on this, is that parking has never been free. It's paid for by taxpayers and grants. So that's something that I always remind myself. Nothing we see is free. It's always been paid for by somebody. And so this really is a way of putting the cost of that infrastructure onto people who use it. So that's where I sort of sit. Comments? And then we're going to get right to the motion. Is anybody, before we go to comments, is anybody opposed to this? Okay, I see nothing opposed. So we're really just brief comments.
Yeah, so the comment is in two stages. One, the First, I certainly support moving forward with downtown paid parking. I do have to comment though, and I recognize Mayor Law's comment. At the same time, the affordability for residents of our community, affordability in general, is a challenge. And whenever we start adding, and recognizing all the parameters around parking in general, when we start adding costs to the living in our community, I find that challenging. And so when looking at that initial timeframes around the 10 to 6 and recognizing that that was in essence a compromise to support that, I still have difficulty with residents paying for parking in a community where we already are challenged with affordability. So I'll leave it at that. But just to say, it is very problematic for me when we start. It's just nonstop adding of costs, and I recognize as the comments were made, but I cannot get away from that affordability factor. And then just you had asked for a nod on support for fee increases, for example, out at the beach. That I'm kind of supportive of, because those are, as you indicated, for the most part, our residents are not subject to those fees, and those that will be gaining the most benefits from a free resource, public resource, will be those that I don't have a problem with those fee increases on. So I am supportive of the what you would ask for those increases for those revenue generation out of those beach parking areas.
To the chair, can I offer a comment on both of your comments?
Yeah.
One way that I've been thinking about this a lot, to Councilor Sear, to your point about residents paying more for this. Residents pay for water utility fees, we pay for sewer utility fees, and we take those money and we directly deal with those utilities and help. That's what runs our water and sewer systems every year. With roads, storm, primarily the sidewalks, we don't have those revenues. So those revenues come directly out of taxation. So whether we pay for roads directly through taxation, which we will when we need to improve, or we have an opportunity to access those through a reserve account based on road usage, you start to see a correlation, or I start to see a correlation between fees for using a service in the same way that we do it. So we're either going to pay, and frankly, people paying downtown will largely be tourists. There will be some residents, but most likely residents have the opportunity to avoid the downtown because they're not here on a holiday and they can make other choices. So I would suspect that we're largely going to see this revenue coming in from the outside core, and what the percentage that the actual Tofino ratepayer pays will be significantly less than that percentage. And so I just wanted to express in a different way, rather than us looking as a municipality that's trying to take more, we're just trying to adjust who's paying for what. So if you have a car and you park downtown, you pay for that privilege. If you're someone who walks or cycles or has up, you're also rewarded for that because your taxes don't go up. So I just wanted to say that as we talked about this, and just making sure that we're framing it in such a manner.
Super, thank you. I think Mr. Rogers wanted to, or we're going to bring back the discussion for fee increases at a later time, or did you want us to give you a thumbs up?
Thumbs up for today. If
we don't need a motion for that, everybody agree on some fee increases for the beach, 50 cents an hour. Great. Okay, perfect. Was there anything else there? I missed it. I don't think I wrote it down. That was the big one. Okay, so can we just go ahead and read this motion? If everybody, I see nobody in opposition. Let's go ahead. Who would like to read this motion? Councillor Thomas.
All right. I'll move that a one-year parking services downtown paid parking contract be awarded to Robbins Parking Services based on a proposal price of $152,898 plus GST, and that the service is to be funded by paid parking program revenue, and that staff be authorized to prepare the required amendments to the downtown core parking policy and District of Tofino traffic and parking regulations bylaw number 1091, 2009. 2023-03, 28 downtown. Oh no, I'm reading the
second.
Excellent. Who's second that? Oh, Councillor McMaster. All right. Any further comments? I look forward to hearing what the public has to say. I think it's gonna be okay. All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. Thank you. Okay, let's go and get on to some really fun stuff. We have a contract award, multi-use path rehabilitation 2023. And we have Project Manager, Todd. It's great to see you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us here this evening. The RFQ award for the multi-use path rehabilitation is going to be from 1296 Pacific Rim Highway to Tree Frog Lane. A brief background on the project is to bring this multi-use path up to the current provincial 4-meter standard. There is quite poor condition of the existing infrastructure. There is substantial root growth through the asphalt currently in this area, specifically when you get closer to Tree Frog Lane. The district investment in the multi-use path to support the multi-modular transportation plan implementation. Project design, the project is 500 lineal meters of multi-use path. There will be some culvert replacement in specified areas as to the discretion of the district. As stated, the 4-meter wide standard will be implemented in this section of the MUP. And there are driveway crossings that extend 1 meter to either side to help mitigate the destruction of the asphalt on the MUP. And root guards will be installed on either side of the pathway as well. This is a brief drawing from the engineers of how the pathway will look. As you can see, we are planning on taking out the corner by 1298 Pacific Rim Highway, just past there. This should add a little safety as that corner is quite sharp and you can't see around it very well. A request for quotation went out for the construction of this on March 1st, 2023. And the opportunity closed on March 17th. This only generated one quote, and the Gibson brothers came in at $387,500. This project will be fully funded by RMI, and the cost is within the average project budget of $403,375. And the recommendation from staff is that the multi-use path rehabilitation gets awarded to the Gibson brothers. Any questions?
Excellent, thank you. Questions? No, seeing none.
I'll read the recommendation.
We got to give Tom a comment. Staley. Give a comment.
I don't have a comment.
Yeah, no, I will comment that I'm looking forward to this project happening because those tree roots are very exciting.
Yes, awesome. It's a great part.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Councillor Steer.
That the 2023 multi-use path rehabilitation construction contract be awarded to Gibson Brothers Contracting Limited based on their submitted price of $387,500 Canadian dollars plus applicable GST.
Anybody Councillor Thomas, the comments, seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council Code of Conduct Review. Ms. Larson.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Maybe I'll just give it a minute to get up on the screen here. Okay, so this evening, the report in front of you is regarding a council code of conduct review. So there were legislative changes made in 2021 to the community charter that made it a requirement that councils within the first 6 months after a local general election, councils either adopt a council code of conduct, or if they already have one, they decide whether or not to review their existing code. And so we're here today because Tofino Council does have a code of conduct policy already. And I'm just asking, or staff is asking direction on whether you'd like to go through a formal review process, or if you will choose to decline reviewing your council code of conduct. So just a little bit of an overview of what my presentation is going to be on today. So I'm going to give a little bit of background as to where we or how we got where we are today. Some of the existing legislative framework that exists outside of council codes of conduct in terms of managing conduct for elected officials. I'm going to do a little review of the Tofino Code of Conduct and go over some of the principles that exist within it, some optional additional provisions if council want to include them. And then the third option, which is to decide not to review your code of conduct at all and just maintain it as it is. And then finally, at the end, there's just a couple options for recommendations depending on what council would like to do. So a little bit of background. In 2017, there was a group formed called the Working Group on Responsible Conduct. And this was a group that undertook collaborative research and policy work on issues of responsible conduct for elected officials. It was a joint initiative by the BC Ministry of Municipal Affairs, the Local Government Management Association, and the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. And through their collaborative work and research, the group developed a model code of conduct to be used as a guide for local councils to develop their own customized versions. In 2019, Tofino used that model code of conduct and was a little bit ahead of the game and ended up creating their own code of conduct policy that was adopted. It's worth noting that no amendments have been made to that policy to date. And then in 2021, there was amendments to the community charter pursuant to Bill 26 of the Municipal Affairs Amendment Act that established the new requirement that all councils of local governments are required to implement council codes of conduct if they don't already have them, or if they do already have them, to choose whether or not to review them. And then, as you all know, October 15th was the general local election, and April 1st is our deadline for council to decide whether or not to review or decline reviewing your code. So council code of conduct changes to the community charter, they build upon responsible conduct standards that already exist within legislation. And so they provide conduct standards that can be supplemented, and they're not the only tool that local government officials have to manage conduct of local elected officials. And this in front of you is just a list of other federal and statutory acts that that do actually set out conflict of interest or confidentiality requirements, bullying and harassment, and other sorts of conduct that you'd be expected as an elected official or even just an employee of the District of Tofino to adhere to. And so that is the Community Charter, the Local Government Act, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the BC Human Rights Code, our own meeting procedure bylaw, the Workers' Compensation Act, and then various occupational health and safety policies. So digging into Tofino's Code of Conduct, the first thing to sort of look at is that we do have a code that was built upon the foundational principles that were outlined in the Working Group on Responsible Conduct's model code. And so that includes integrity, respect, accountability, leadership, and collaboration. Tofino's code contains high-level definitions of each of those and was developed based on council's specific ideas on the types of conduct standards that are expected of Tofino's elected officials. So if council does decide to review decides they'd like to review its current code, staff suggests retaining the foundational principles and that council consider discussing the meaning of each principle as it relates to the context of the district. In considering whether or not to review your existing code, council may wish to consider the following questions. So are there additional principles that are fundamentally important to council that are not currently included in the code of conduct? And are there particular values that are important to council that should be explicitly defined within the code? So on top of the foundational principles that exist within council's code of conduct, there actually isn't a formalized enforcement mechanism that's included in there. When staff reviewed your council code of conduct, we determined that the existing policy may benefit from a couple additional provisions. One is the inclusion of formal enforcement mechanisms, and the second is an expansion to include provisions that outline what additional events could trigger future reviews of the policy. So the first one, establishing an enforcement mechanism. In 2019, when Tofino adopted its current code, recommendations from the working group on responsible conduct didn't include enforcement mechanism suggestions related to a breach of the code. And so that's essentially why there isn't one included now. And based on latest research, some councils are finding that they may decide to formalize enforcement to support compliance. It's worth noting that there are various statutory laws and legal processes available for formal enforcement outside of a code of conduct. And there are advantages to retaining an informal enforcement process versus adopting a more formal process. So some of the advantages that were included in the working group on responsible conduct's sort of best practices guides is informal enforcement processes. They help maintain relationships. They can lead to better outcomes. They can lead to quicker resolutions. They can be less divisive and they can be less costly. And then there's advantages to formal enforcement mechanisms, including enhanced certainty and transparency in the process, improved compliance, administrative efficiencies, and enhanced fairness. So one of the key takeaways from research done from the working group on responsible conduct is that they found it really is worth focusing effort and prevention into informal enforcement mechanisms instead of defaulting to formal disciplinary actions, and that enforcement tools are available only if enforcement processes don't work. So it could be worth Tofino Council considering whether since 2019 and the adoption of the previous policy, if Council considers that maybe there have been situations where more formal processes would have been desirable, or if Council is happy with the informal processes that exist currently. So should Council decide to review your code of conduct, staff is requesting direction on whether to bring forward options to include formal enforcement mechanisms within the code. And the second part of the additional provisions is with amendments to the community charter in 2021, there's now a legislative timeline for councils to review their codes, and that's within 6 months after a local general election. But council may want to consider if they would like other events to trigger a review. And if you do, what those things would be. And so off the top of my head, I think maybe a by-election or an annual review process, or maybe every other year, or potentially council is happy with just reviewing every 4 years after a general local election. So the third option is the option to not review your code of conduct at all. And so this is stated in the community charter. So if a council decides, and it's written in the legislation, that they do not either wish to establish a code of conduct or they do not wish to review an existing code, it must be available to the public on request a statement respecting the reasons for its decision. And so some of the considerations that council might consider if they decide, or if you decide not to review your code is council satisfied with the current foundational principles and standards of conduct as described in your existing code? Do you prefer to focus on improvement or do you prefer to focus on continuous improvement to foster responsible conduct, maintain good governance, and resolve conduct issues formally? And are you satisfied with the current legislative timelines and processes for reviewing your code? If you are satisfied with all of those, then potentially deciding to decline reviewing your code is the right step. And so this slide just has the recommendation options requested from staff. So the first one is an example resolution should you choose to do a more fulsome review of your council code of conduct. Staff is requesting some discussion around some of the different sections of the code that you may like to add or amend. And then staff can work on coming forward with some policy amendment options for consideration at a future committee of the whole meeting. And then the second one is just if you do decide to decline reviewing your code, having a statement in the form of a resolution would be handy, just to meet the requirement of the community charter to have a statement available to the public on the reasons why you've decided to decline reviewing it.
Excellent. Thank you. Questions from Ms. Larson? Questions before we go? I see no questions, but we gotta have some kind of question. So just to clarify, Ms. Larson, if council is happy with the existing code of conduct, it already has an informal enforcement portion. We basically talk it out, or we with senior staff, et cetera, our CAO. So that would, to stay status quo would require no review.
Exactly, yes. Thank you, Mayor Law.
But if now here's the other question for you. For council, if council is happy with the current state of our code of conduct, but wishes to sort of add a default protective mechanism and say, let's review this the second year of every term, as well as within 6 months, legislative, to allow council to sort of have a backup review in case council goes crazy and we all behave really poorly. Where would that sit in this motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Law. I think if there was a straightforward request that council was satisfied with in terms of adding a provisional timeline, like 2 years for review, that discussion could take place now, and that could be included in the resolution. If council thinks that they prefer to have a more formal review process in a committee of the whole type scenario with other options presented for discussion, then I would suggest that first resolution with maybe just some informal input that I can kind of take back and work on to bring back to you. But if it's something straightforward like that, like you're happy with your code of conduct, but you'd rather just review it every 2 years instead of 4, then I think just amending the motion today after some discussion would suffice.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for comments from council. And council, are you happy with your code of conduct? Councillor Steer?
Yeah, start charge. I am happy with our code of conduct. The foundational principles are solid, and when we discuss those, they're well defined. I think they're still applicable. When reviewing this and reading the report, and then the most recent municipal councils, if you have been paying attention, have had some issues in certain areas. So it struck me that, wow, like we've been super fortunate in the councils that we've had, but we can't project into the future what that may mean. So with the informal mechanism, which I highly support, was there room for potentially a more formalized mechanism to deal with those kinds of situations into the future? My gut tells me no. I don't want to go there, but I wanted to hear what council felt in terms of having a more formalized mechanism for dealing with the issues that very recently, if you've been paying attention, have come forward. And so I was looking forward to hearing what the rest of council. My general feeling is I'm very happy with the way that we have structured our code of conduct. I'm also happy with the 4-year time frame. Whenever there is a general election, it gives a new council coming in the opportunity to review that process. This council, well, the councils that are elected upon that review should be well aware of it. And so if there was changes to be made, I think it would be too late into a process 2 years in if there was issues that had come up. The cat's already out of the bag, so to speak. So if we were interested in that, a more formalized now would be the opportunity, but I'm not personally feeling that way. So that I'll leave it at that. I'm curious to hear the rest of the council. The only thing that I did, and it's in my note, the only thing that I think would be, and I was trying to remember through our initial council training, so to speak, is more education around our code of conduct. So whenever after the 4-year, when there's a new council that is elected, that, and I can't remember in ours, if we had a more formalized code of conduct discussion and the implications of what that, and if we did, I apologize for paying attention. So that would be my only comment is that with our code of conduct, that we all understand it and we have a good educated process on it. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Go around. Who's next? Councillor McMaster.
I'm happy the way things are. I think I was around when we adopted the code of conduct. We basically adopted the proposal from the UBCM, and I think it had been well thought out. Certainly they put more thought into it than what we would have done. So I think it's pretty good as it is, and I think maybe we're lucky, but I just think informal enforcement is a lot better than forceful enforcement. And I think we can resolve things among ourselves and staff pretty easily. We're in a small town, we're not in a big city or anything like that.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. Anybody else? Councillor Anderson.
I agree. I think our code of conduct is good, is solid. I can't think of any situation that has really tested it though. It's impossible to think of every situation that might arise at the council table. Primarily is where we behave, I think. I think it's kind of impossible to anticipate everything that might occur and then have the code of conduct cover it. And it would be nice if we could, because the worst situation is trying to modify your kind of code of conduct in the middle of some sort of a disagreement. But having said that, I support the principles in it. I can't think of any thing I'd really, any real gaps or times when we've noticed things that need to be added. So I'd be in favor of not changing it at this time.
Thomas? Comments?
I think it's all pretty much been said. I'm more in favor of informal stuff than formal.
Just slow in. Any comments? Nothing? Okay. Well, I think that's pretty clear. I think we're all fairly happy with what we have and prefer for informal enforcement. And I don't hear anybody wanting to speed up the review process, as I suggested would be a possibility. So I think with that, as a comment, as I was listening, I thought, but if we did have a chance, like if something was to happen and we needed a formal enforcement at that point, it's would just be really sad. So I'm not sure if formal enforcement would help the situation. You know what I mean? Like we're all sitting in the same room the next day, hopefully. So I think that we can all, at least, as far as I can see, we can all agree to respect each other and try hard. So I think we'll leave it at that. Then it sounds like that the District of Tofino declines reviewing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Because we're satisfied with it as is.
Okay.
We don't want to be sad.
Satisfied. Okay, well, I think, why don't I read from the chair that the District of Tofino Council declines reviewing existing council code of conduct policy because council is satisfied with the existing one.
That sounds great.
And we're all so nice. So we're not. It's too late. Don't write that in, that's not part of it.
Yeah. Too late.
Did you get that? Did you get that, Mr. Shorthouse? Except for the last part. That wasn't in that. Okay, any further comments? No, all in favor? All right, motion's carried, thank you. We're moving on to bylaws. We have a couple bylaws for adoption. We have no presentations. These are just, we've already read first, second, third reading. These are for adoption. Would somebody like to read the first one?
I'll move that the District of Tofino Water Utility Amendment Bylaw number 1213-04 2023 be adopted.
Second.
Second by Councillor Master. All in favor? None opposed, motion carried. next.
And that the District of Tofino Sewer Utility Amendment Bylaw number 1214-02, 2023 be adopted.
Second.
Councilor Master, any further comments? None, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. We have business initiated by council members. We have Councilor McMaster and Councilor Sawyer.
Yeah, Councillor Sawyer and I are going to switch positions with the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board of Trustees, and she will take over as the trustee and I will be the alternate. So for the records, I'll move that Councillor Sawyer be appointed as trustee and Councillor McMaster be approved as alternate to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board of Trustees beginning March 28, 2023 for a term ending earliest of 1, council appoints another council member, 2, the council member ceases to hold office, or 3, the council member is removed for cause as provided under the Libraries Act December 31, 2023.
Good. Second by Councilor Thomas.
Maybe I'll comment quickly. Just
We can have now's the time. Brief.
Thank you. Yeah, I just today, somebody approached me and I gave them your name, Councillor McMaster. They're doing their master's project at the University of Toronto, it's a local. And I gave them your name as the contact for, so if you get an email, you can just refer to Councillor Sawyer.
All right, seeing no further comments, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you very much for your service. Do we have any other unfinished business from council? Seeing none, moving on to question period. Mr. Shortall, do we have anybody signed up?
Currently, there is no questions, Mayor Law. I will do a call for questions. So if anybody in attendance virtually over Zoom has any comments for Mayor and Council, they can do so by raising their hand in the question and answer function, leaving their name, stating their address, and then also stating the agenda item you're speaking to, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times, and there is no questions at this point, Mayor Law.
Super, thank you. Well, we'll move into the recommendation for closed session. Would anybody like to read this?
All right.
Yeah.
I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 90 of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to 1A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. 1B, personal information about an identifiable individual who is being considered for municipal award or honor or who has offered to provide a gift to the municipality on condition of anonymity. 1C, labor relations or other employee relations. 1E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. 1G, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality. 1I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. 1K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at the preliminary stages and that, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they are held in public. And 1L, discussions with municipal officers and employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purposes of preparing an annual report under Section 98 Annual Municipal Report.
Second by Councilor Amazon. Oh, there you go. Any further comments? Good job. All in favor? Oh, did you have a comment? Too late. All in favor, I believe. Motion carried. We're in close.